ladies and gentlemen, Wuthering Waves has been coming out with a ton of news when it comes to version 2.0. And of course, with the release of Cantarella, the amazing new Resonator, coming to this game, we're also going to have her signature weapon. And so what I wanted to do was take some time to break down everything that this weapon is going to do, who some of its best users might be, and its overall pull value when it comes to your entire account. Weapons in Wuthering Waves are something that you can share around pretty easily. They're something that's a huge investment that a player makes, spending all of those limited pulls, and it's something that you definitely want to keep in mind as you're building out the strength of your account and pulling all of those different limited characters, because reusing a weapon, slotting it on a different unit in all of your endgame content, that's going to be one of the best ways to get value out of it. And so with that, let's go ahead and get right into just how good Whispers of Siren actually is. And so with that, let's dive right on into it. All right, folks, if you're thinking about spending money in Wuwa to get Cantarella or her weapon, you'd probably want to save a bit of cash. LD Shop is a fantastic way of doing that, and I'll show you exactly why. LDshop.gg gives you access to huge discounts on pretty much anything you can buy in a ton of games. But let's click on Wuwa for now. The monthly pass, usually it's $5 dues, but on LD Shop, it'll be much less. What a deal! To claim one of these discounts, just select the item you're looking for and click top up to submit your payment. You'll need your Kuro linked account email, password, and username. This might seem a bit off, but remember that LD Shop already works with sensitive account information with their emulator, LD Player, so you can trust them for their services. They also have excellent reviews on Trustpilot. If you created an account with Gmail or Facebook, use the directions in the top up menu to link your account to an email. After finalizing your payment info, wait a couple of minutes and your items will be on your account. New users can get a 10% discount and an additional 5% using my sponsored link, and first-time top-up bonuses are available as well. That means you can get some big discounts. Spending $80 or more will net you a VIP membership, which can get you a free 30-day Lunite subscription. So try LD Shop today. All right, now that we're back, let's dive into Whispers of Sirens. Let's take a look at the base stats. This weapon is going to be really similar to a lot of the rectifiers that we've seen in this game, coming equipped with a relatively low base attack of 500 relative to other weapons and a whopping super high crit damage of 72%. If you all are familiar with some of the rectifiers that are already in this game, they all share a very similar stat profile. We have Phoebe's over here, which has a attack of 500 and a crit rate of 36. We have Stringmaster, which also has an attack of 500 and a crit rate of 36. It definitely makes sense that we're seeing this weapon over here for Cantarella, an attack of 500 and a doubled crit damage up from 36 over to 72. And so if you all own Jedge's weapon, which is a very low number of players because it's not really that great, it has the same exact stat profile as this. And when it comes to this sort of weapon, this means that you're definitely going to want a crit rate forecast. You're really going to want to search for a lot of crit rate substats because it is much harder to build a character with this type of stat portfolio compared to using something like Stringmaster or using something like Luminous Hymn, however you want to pronounce it. That's because of one very simple thing. And I'll just use my Jeja over here as an example. I can go ahead and slot on a Stringmaster onto her, and I'm going to have a crazy high crit rate of 82%, and a pretty respectable crit damage of 275%. If I were to go ahead and just review some of my Echo substats, you might be surprised at what you're gonna find. Double crit, okay, double crit, sure. Double crit here as well. And on this last Echo that I have over here, I'm completely missing crit rate across all of its substats. I do not have a crit rate substat on this Echo. And this is the thing. Having a weapon that gives you 36% critical rate gives you so much more freedom in your actual Echo building and your Echo slotting. I could just remove this Echo completely, subtract 9.3% from my stats, and I'll still have 72.7% crit rate. That is usable in any game content. That's actually pretty good. 72.7% crit rate is perfectly fine and will definitely activate the Empirine Anthem set effect and deal good damage in your team. And I'm doing that missing 2 crit rate substats across my Echoes. They're just not even there. I unequipped an Echo. And this is the thing. When you have that much freedom in your build, this makes reaching the end game and having something very usable across all the content so much easier than using a crit damage weapon. With a crit damage weapon, you have to get that crit rate on every single piece. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a ratio that's like below 60, maybe even 50%. And that is a lot to work with, and that can be really difficult to build around. And so you might be able to reach some of the highest crit damage levels possible, maybe like 310% with a baseline build. But boy, oh boy, it's going to be hard keeping up with that crit rate unless your echoes roll really well. And that's why in a lot of cases, Stringmaster kind of is like a better option. Not because its effect might necessarily be better, but because, well, it's a lot easier to build around, and you can use the same sort of build on every single character. And so with that, we've covered all the base stats. We've compared it to some of the other weapons. Do keep in mind that this is a much lower base attack than some of the other 5-star weapons in the game. Just using, let's just say Camellias, for example, this is going to have like 587 in exchange for lower critical stats. And so that's going to be the trade-off that you're seeing over here. But do keep in mind, this is going to give you some of the highest damage possible. Now, we've covered all the base stats. We've covered the dynamics that we're seeing over here and some of the shortfalls and the advantages of having crit damage instead of crit rate. Now let's get into the weapon skill itself. And boy, oh boy, this is pretty unique. So the weapon skill is going to be called From the Deep. And you're going to see all the various effects at all the various synchronization ranks. We're just going to be looking at rank 1 for the purpose of this analysis because you are going to have to pull this weapon. So at first glance, it's going to increase attack by 12%. Pretty typical sort of passive. You either have an increase of attack by 12%, or in the case of a weapon like Stringmaster, you would see a 12% attribute damage bonus. I'm personally of the boat that a 12% attribute damage bonus is better than attack in most cases, because a 12% attribute damage bonus is like having this line over here, basic attack damage bonus, but for all damage types at the same exact time. While attack is just a substat that you can roll on your echo, and inherently it has a bit less value because it's much harder to get an attribute damage bonus that works for all types of damage compared to an attack bonus, which you can just get and roll on your echoes. And so that's going to be a bit of a ding against this weapon because it has a much more accessible, much easier to find damage bonus as its initial sort of stat. Now let's get into what it actually does and some more details on its weapon effect. Casting an echo skill within 10 seconds after casting an intro skill or your basic attack grants 1 stack of Gentle Dream. And so just using an echo skill, which Cantarella obviously has throughout her kit, a lot of her abilities count as echo skills, or just using an echo skill as a normal unit who doesn't have them built into their kit, you know, being like a Jeja or being like a Yinlin, it's going to give you that 1 stack of Gentle Dream. Echoes with the same name can only trigger this effect once, stacking up to 2 times, lasting for 10 seconds. And so what this means is that Cantarella is going to be the only character that's really able to activate the full effect of this weapon. She's kind of the only character that has multiple uses of echo skills built into her kit. And let me just show you all exactly what I'm talking about over here. She has her resonance skill, her enhanced one that appears when she's in Mirage. That's going to count as an echo skill when it's cast. She also has a resonance liberation, which also counts as casting another resonance skill. And then she's also going to have her Forte enhanced resonance skill, which is built up through actions on the field. And that's going to give her an attack called Perception Drain that seizes the enemy. And of course, is counted as an echo skill. So she's over there. She's able to do all of this stuff. And she's kind of one of the only characters that will be able to do it. Because even if you have an echo skill that has like a shorter cooldown, you can only trigger it 1 time if it's a specific name. And so pretty much every character is only going to be able to get 1 stack of it. So when you reach 2 stacks, which really only Cantarella can do, casting an echo skill no longer resets the duration of this effect, and the effect activates up to once per 10 seconds, and then switching to another character ends the effect early. So this will not persist off field. This is something that is only going to be active while the character is on field. And so this kind of leads me to believe that Cantarella's coordinated attacks aren't meant to do a lot of damage because this only buffs her while she's on the field and will buff any resonator equipping it while they're on the field. And then the effect is lost the second that she switches off. And so it does look like a majority of Cantarella's damage is going to be focused on her actions on field. And then her coordinated attacks are sort of just like in the background and shouldn't matter as much to her damage portfolio, because losing this buff when her coordinated attacks mostly deal basic attack damage is a pretty significant thing. And so with 1 stack, Cantarella being the only character that can build up 2, with 1 stack, you're going to get a 40% basic attack damage bonus. And with 2 stacks, you're going to ignore 12% of the target's havoc resistance. I'm going to be real here. This weapon skill is actually surprisingly versatile, and it is actually surprisingly friendly for other units on the roster, because let's be honest here, there's not really a lot of other havoc rectifier users in the game. And so not being able to access the 2 stack buff that ignores havoc resistance isn't that big of a deal if you're using this on a character like Jeja, if you're using this on a character like Yinlin, if you're using this on a character like Encore, or even if you're using it on a character like Phoebe. And the reason why it's not a huge deal is because none of these characters deal havoc damage. Phoebe is Spectro, Jeja's Glacio, Yitlin's Electro, and Encore is Fusion. And so the end result is that this entire weapon effect over here of ignoring the target's havoc resistance, not having it is basically a non-factor. And so even though all of these characters that we just mentioned are only able to build up one stack and only access the basic attack damage bonus, that's all they really need. And it's not like they would be even able to leverage the second stack anyways. And so with that, you do have to keep in mind that there are some annoying caveats with this weapon. The main one being something that I've mentioned before. Switching to another resonator ends this effect early. And so it's going to be a little bit difficult. It's going to be a little bit hard to weave this into a lot of characters' rotations. There's something that you typically do with a character like Encore, and I'll just demonstrate it live for you all. Let's just get into combat real fast. There's something you might typically do when you're building, when you're rotating throughout the team, and that's use your Echo skill first, right? To get through that big animation. And then you're going to like swap onto the character afterwards. And then have that Echo skill buff active, and then not have to worry about the cast time in their rotation. Unfortunately, if you're doing something like that and you're trying to use that sort of tactic, you're just going to lose the Echo skill buff completely because you're switching to another character. And so the only way to really use this is to use your Echo skill after using your intro skill, and then go ahead and then go through the rest of your rotation. It's a little bit clunky. It's going to cause some issues in your rotations, and it might not be something that you actually want to use. It does provide a much higher baseline buff than Jeja's weapon, where Jeja's will basically give you 3 separate stacks upon using a resident skill. This gives you a lot of the stacks immediately and is going to be at a baseline probably stronger than Jeja's weapon on a character like Encore, but it's going to be clunkier to use. And so unfortunately, while these buffs are a lot more accessible and while these buffs are, you know, a lot more immediate, they might be harder to use in a lot of optimal rotations, and you might have to like kind of mess around, have a bit of a DPS loss somewhere else in your kit if you do want to make use of it. And so having this whole line about switching to another resonator ends the effect early, I do think it's a bit of a miss, especially when Cantarella has her own coordinated attacks, but it is what it is. And so I would say when it comes to all of the other users on the roster, I would say Phoebe definitely has a use case with it because she does deal a decent amount of damage with her basic attacks. She summons the Ring of Mirrors. All of these attacks that she's doing in here, they're considered basic attack damage, and she does continually use basic attacks to build up to her heavy attacks. And so she's a character that can make a lot of use out of it. She also uses this Sonata set, Eternal Radiance, and that gives 20% crit rate just for existing and attacking targets with Spectro Frazzle on them. And so Phoebe shouldn't really have very many issues at all maintaining a great crit rate, and she will be able to leverage the very, very powerful base stats that we're seeing over here on this weapon and could reach some crazy high values. I would say that this weapon is probably better on her than Jeja's weapon is on her. And so you might end up with some crazy Phoebe builds where the crit damage is at like maybe 320, 330%. And that could lead to some really surprisingly good performance on her. And it's something that you should look out for if you do end up pulling this. Another user that's probably going to be very good with this weapon is, again, like you might have noticed from the demo, it's probably going to be Encore, because Encore is a basic attack damage focused character, and this weapon will give her that 40% immediately, as long as she's willing to use something like Inferno Rider right after introing in. Do keep in mind, though, that the other Inferno Rider, the Nightmare version, does have a much faster cast animation, and could be something that you just decide to use instead, because you're already getting a 40% damage buff from the weapon. This is going to instead buff her resonant skill damage, and she does do a fair amount of resonant skill damage in her rotations too. However, you do have to keep in mind that this buff is only going to last about 10 seconds, and so it could expire while you're in the middle of both of those characters' most damaging rotations. A third character that this could actually be usable on is, surprisingly enough, Jeja. Jeja does a lot of damage with her basic attacks, and it's really easy for her to weave in an intro skill like Hecate into her rotation, where you just literally click it and it's there. But unfortunately, a majority of Jeja's damage is through her coordinated attacks, and as we all know, she's gonna lose that basic attack damage buff the second that she leaves the field. And when this is a majority of her damage, that's not really that great. It could result in a DPS loss, a significant one compared to a signature. But if you do have her signature, you're probably using it on her. The last character that I would maybe keep in mind as a potential user of this weapon is Yinlin. And the only reason you should be using this weapon on Yinlin is as a crit stat stick. It is not really that good on her at all because Yinlin does basically negative damage with her basic attacks. She pretty much doesn't want to use them at all. She actually uses heavy attacks more often just to fuel her forte circuit. Her heavy attacks don't really deal damage either. And so just think of it as like a critical stat stick. That's all it's going to be on Yinlin. And if you really need a critical stat stick, go for it. But if that's the case, you should just be pulling Yinlin's weapon instead and actually using it on Cantarella, because this is the most general weapon in the game. It's kind of like the best general weapon in the game. If you had a choice between like pulling this or any other signature, I would just go for String Master. And so at the end of the day, we've taken a look at all the comparisons. We've taken a look at all of the different kits. And I gotta say that this weapon is surprisingly versatile, but also not that very high value because it does have that clunk. It does have a bit of a shorter duration unless Cantarella is the person using it. And in comparison to String Master, it's kind of just not that good. It really just kind of is not that good compared to String Master in terms of versatility. And after reading through a bit of Cantarella's kit, I'm going to be real here. Cantarella is probably going to be able to get a lot of performance out of String Master anyways. And so if you are looking for the highest value, like bang for your buck when it comes to a weapon, it's always a struggle when it comes to a rectifier because String Master is so damn good and so damn versatile that I can always make the argument, instead of pulling a signature weapon like this, why don't you just save for String Master and pull it when it has a rerun? Because String Master typically all the time ends up having like 90 to 95% of the overall performance of a character's limited weapon. And it's a bit of a design issue that I think the devs have been working forward from. String Master is kind of like too strong, and that really just diminishes the value of every other 5-star limited rectifier that releases after it. So that's going to be the overall critical analysis. I would say it's not necessarily a must pull. It's probably one of the best or one of the better general use weapons for the rectifier class, but it's still far behind String Master. And so if you had a choice, if you have some patience, I would recommend waiting for String Master instead and save your pulls in the present and not really go for this one. But if you want Cantarella to have her jellyfish, to have the best visual aesthetics, go for it. Now let's get into the last bit of the puzzle over here, and that's going to be the Ascension materials. And thankfully enough, these are just Ascension materials that you can farm in 1.0. You won't have to worry about waiting until 2.2 to build up all these items. You're going to have the Presto Helix over here, just the baseline rectifier level up mat, and then tailored rings, which you can get from Exiles, or of course, just convert them using the synthesis module. And it's great to see that we're not going to need anything absolutely insane. We're not going to need anything unique to the new zones. We're just going to be able to go with a lot of the materials that we likely already have. So that's going to be our full overview of Cantarella's weapon. That's going to be our full overview of Whispers of Sirens. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know what you all think, whether or not you're going to pull this weapon, or if you're going to do a little bit of saving in patch 2.2. Peace out.